Hello and welcome to another episode of TDNY. This day, not year. The podcast that looks back at the history of the week ahead. Join me, Adam, as I take a quick look into 7 historical stories that happened on the days, just not year, of the coming week. We also have our regular song pairings for each story and a quiz at the end. So pay attention. Or don't. So long as you're having a good time and come away learning at least something new, that's the important thing. And, speaking of learning, on this week's episode, we'll learn about Oscar and Tony's unwanted younger sibling, Sydney's close shave with an iceberg, when being fired is all part of your job, and of the phone call Joel Engel dreaded. Plus a whole lot more along the way. So, let's get started with Monday, March 31st. On this day, not year, Hollywood got given the raspberry. We ended on a story about a movie last week, so let's kick this week off in a similar fashion. Rubus ellipticus is a thorny climbing shrub in the rose family. Found naturally around India and China, it can grow stems 4.5 meters long and produces a sweet fruit that is favored by birds and other animals. What does this have to do with movies? Well, it shares a name with an award within Hollywood, although it's not one many would boast of winning. The name of the award, and the more common name for Rubus ellipticus, is Golden Raspberry. The Academy Awards, also known as the Oscars, are, according to Wikipedia, widely considered to be the most prestigious award in the film industry, and regularly attract between 10 to 20 million viewers. Hollywood talent, from actors to writers to designers and makeup artists, are nominated for categories such as Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Costume Design, among a host of others. Interestingly, the awards also used to have a Best Original Story category. And if you've seen a lot of movies recently, you may be thinking, I just can't imagine why that was removed. And while your sarcasm is noted, and warranted, this category was for film treatments, the movie outline done pre-script, and not stories in general. The prize for those who win is an Oscar Award, a 34-centimeter tall, solid bronze statuette, plated in gold, and shaped after a knight holding a sword. Winners after 1950 can't sell their awards, legally having to offer it back to the Academy Awards first for the price of $1. Although pre-1950s are fair game. Which is how, before his death, Michael Jackson had the Oscar for the 1940s Best Picture. Although since his passing it appears no one quite knows where the Oscar is, almost like it's gone with the wind. The Razzie, or Golden Raspberry, differs slightly from the prestige of the Oscars. Rather than recognizing excellence, it goes much the opposite. As per Wikipedia, the Golden Raspberry Awards is a parody award show honoring the worst of cinematic failures. Now, obviously we shouldn't be deriding anyone's work, efforts, or attempts, especially anyone on just 12 episodes of a new podcast, hint hint. But for Hollywood, where movies are often made just to keep a license, or shelved entirely for a tax write-off, an industry where it's theorized, by some, that the only reason the universe is still expanding is to contain the inflated ego of Hollywood. Well, occasionally a little mocking is required, and that occasion rolls around once a year, the day prior to the Oscars, in the form of the Golden Raspberry or the Razzies. The history of the Golden Raspberry can be attributed to a double movie feature of Xanadu and Can't Stop the Music, attended by Los Angeles-based publicist and movie copywriter John B. Wilson. March 31st, 1981, after a potluck dinner hosted at his house in honor of viewing that year's Oscars, John, after the ceremony, got up on a makeshift cardboard podium with fake microphone, a styrofoam bowl on a broomstick, in hand, and presented the awards to the worst movies of the year, announcing Can't Stop the Music as the overall winner. The following day saw stories of the event reach newspapers and publications, and the event grew year upon year. 1982 saw a press release issued over the picks and winners, and by 1984, 3 major television networks were covering the event. Press coverage was helped by moving the events to the day before the Academy Awards, when reporters have gathered, waiting for the traditional event to start, but with nothing to cover beforehand. While the Golden Raspberry Award shows are usually seen as a joke, a comedic prelude to the real event the following evening, this hasn't stopped several winners from showing up in person. 2005 saw Halle Berry accept her award for Worst Actress in person for her role in Catwoman. Sandra Bullock did the same in 2010 for her role in All About Steve, wheeling in a cart full of copies of the movie as gifts to the audience. In the years since the Golden Raspberry Awards have been running, a number of actors and Hollywood greats have won a Razzie. Sylvester Stallone has 12 wins, Adam Sandler 9, M. Night Shyamalan with 5, being just a few of the consistent winners. However, 2 people are part of a very exclusive award club within Hollywood. It's normally considered an extraordinary event to become an EGOT holder, the Grand Slam of awards. That is, winning an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony Award. But only 2 people are REGOT holders, adding a Razzie Award into the mix. Alan Menken, a composer, winning his Razzie for song High Times, Hard Times from the movie Newsies. The same year he won an Oscar for A Whole New World in Aladdin. The second REGOT holder is actress Liza Minnelli, winning her Razzie for the 1987 movie Rent-A-Cop. The 45th Golden Raspberry Awards were held February 28, 2025, and saw Madam Web win Worst Picture, with Jerry Seinfeld and Dakota Johnson winning Worst Actor and Actress. Now, a fitting song for this story. This was an interesting choice, as the singer had a movie release recently, and while it managed to dodge the attention of the Golden Raspberries, it also didn't walk away with an Oscar. I'm of course talking about Robbie Williams with the song I Will Talk and Hollywood Will Listen. Tuesday, April 1st. On this day, not year, there would be no ice for Sydney, Australia. Richard Harold Smith was born 18th of March 1944 in Roseville, New South Wales. Young Richard struggled in school. In grade 5, he was ranked 45th out of a class of 47. And after 3 years of studying French, only scored 7% on an exam. While he struggled academically, Richard would prove to be a deft businessman. Starting from a small car radio business in 1968, that quickly expanded into a full electronics retailer that he even named after himself, Dick Smith Electronics. Dick Smith was an eccentric who revelled in keeping stories of his antics in the media, using creativity and uniqueness as a means for free publicity. He also had an unfortunate habit of naming products after himself. I'm sure many Australians still remember his own brand of redhead matches, the Dickhead, and the less said about his food empire of self-named sauces and cheese, the better. A TV program guide from 1978 describes an interview with Dick on the Inside Story show as a millionaire who delights in waving at passing trains, calls himself a electronics nut, and holds lovely leg competitions amongst his male staff. That's 34-year-old Dick Smith, Australia's zaniest businessman. 1978 is also the year we find ourselves in for this story. For months now, Dick Smith has been publicly discussing the idea of towing an iceberg from Antarctica to Australia, as a means of providing water for any drought-stricken areas and selling chunks of the ice off, branded as Dixicles. Finally, Friday, 31st of March, he gets word back to the media. He is a week out from returning to Sydney, with an iceberg in tow. But it takes Dick less than a week to arrive. Just the day after, on Saturday, he was sighted coming through the Sydney Heads, the coastal headlands leading into Sydney Harbour. It was a rainy, misty morning in Sydney, and that would go on to prove an issue later for Dick Smith. But for now, hundreds of calls were going through to local radio shows and the media as the iceberg was sighted sailing into the harbour. Thousands of people began lining the shore, watching this incredible first. An iceberg towed all the way from Antarctica to Sydney Harbour. Only, isn't it leaving behind a weird trail? And does it seem to be melting away? Standing atop the iceberg, as it was slowly making its way towards the Sydney Opera House, Dick, live on Radio 2SM, made an announcement to all who had gathered. April Fools. It had all started days earlier, when an employee of Dick's, the loveliness of their legs unknown, said to him, "Dick, April Fool's Day is coming. Why don't we tow a fake iceberg into Sydney Harbour?" So, with the media primed that an iceberg was on the way, at 3 a.m., under the cover of darkness, Dick Smith and a small crew towed a barge out past the Sydney Heads and got to work constructing an iceberg. It was simpler and cheaper than one may imagine. The bulk of the berg was made from plastic sheeting, shaving cream, and firefighting foam. Apparently, the total cost for the fake was somewhere between $1,200 to $1,450, which included hiring the barge and the tugboat. Construction completed, it was christened the Dickenberg 1, and was now ready to wait for the morning and its grand entrance. As it was being towed towards the Sydney Opera House, the pranksters weren't going to take any chances of it not being noticed, and had planted 300 employees to be the ones to call in sightings to the radio shows, to the television media, and to the newspapers. Thousands lined the shores, and boats even came up to the Dickenberg 1, sailing away with fresh ice, straight from the freezer of the tugboat. In an interview right after, asked why he had decided to pull this prank, Dick responded, "I just do these things for kicks. It takes the boredom out of everyday work." It's a shame we've already used Ship of Fools in a previous story, as that would also fit quite nicely here. After looking at a lot of April Fool-themed playlists, which just seem to be scraped together from any song with the word fool in the title, like, seriously, what does Love Fool by the Cardigans have to do with April Fools? But then the perfect song hit. Everybody's building ships and boats. Some are building monuments, others jotting down notes. Everybody's in despair, every girl and boy. But when Quinn the Eskimo gets here, everybody's going to jump for joy. Mighty Quinn by Manfred Mann is a fitting pairing, with Dick Smith taking the role as the titular Quinn. Let's just hope he doesn't do his own cover of the song. Wednesday, April 2nd. On this day, not year, watch her go. See her fly. Rosa Matilda Richter waited in the darkness, muscles tensed. Outside, she could hear the cheers of a crowd, muffled by the large cylinder she was confined in, until suddenly, silence. Before she knew it, a deafening explosion surrounded her, and through smoke and the remnants of an explosion, she was hurled from her confines, sent shooting through the air before crashing down. The crowd remained silent, breath held. Slowly, Rosa stirred, clambered down from the net, and bowed to the thunderous applause of the watchers. This had been her life, twice daily for a while now. Rosa Matilda Richter, under her stage name Zazelle, was the first human cannonball. Born April 1860 in London, her father was a talent agent and her mother a circus performer. It seemed almost determined from birth that Rosa would follow her mother into the performance arts. From a young age she performed in theatre, learnt ballet and gymnastics, and finally at age 6 started as a trapeze artist. Performing as La Petite Lulu eventually saw Rosa at age 12 join a travelling circus act that toured Europe. An accident in 1872, a fall from the trapeze, during an act in France, had her retire from this travelling act and return to England. Her father forbade her from any more performances. Her mother, on the other hand, had her under no such restrictions, and, after some deception, Rosa had signed a contract with William Leonard Hunt, otherwise known as the Great Farini. A contract her father thought only included singing and dancing, but William Hunt had other plans. Hunt, as the Great Farini, had a reputation as an expert funambulist, or tightrope walker, having crossed Niagara Falls on tightrope in 1860. Far from just walking across the gap, as per Wikipedia, Farini's feats included crossing a high wire with a man on his back, or with a sack over his entire body, turning somersaults while on the rope, hanging from it by his feet, and other seemingly impossible maneuvers. However, 1869 would see Hunt hanging up the Farini Act, and instead turn to managing and training others. He also put himself to work inventing new stunts for others to perform. With Rosa now performing for Farini, together they started working on a new trick to perform in London's Royal Aquarium. While called an aquarium, the only fish the building ever displayed was a dead whale. Rather than a place of learning, the building developed a new reputation, one of, to quote historian John Sands, a glorified freak show. So, it was on this day, April 2nd, 1877, when Rosa and Farini were to show off the stunt they had been working on, the human cannonball. The audience loved it, from the perceived danger of the stunt to the form-fitting clothing Rosa had to adorn for the act. Crowds flocked to see Zazelle, the first human cannonball. For those wondering, Zazelle wasn't actually fired from the cannon by gunpowder, like a regular cannonball would be. Instead, the propulsion is obtained by contracting rubber springs that, when released, have stored enough energy to catapult Giselle out of the cannon through the air between 6 and 20 meters, or 20 to 70 feet, accounts vary, and onto the waiting safety net. The illusion of a firing cannon is helped along by a small gunpowder charge firing at the same time to emit flame and smoke from the mouth of the cannon. As her fame grew, and with songs even being written about her, "It's wonderful fun when she's shot from her gun. I'd live and I'd die for Giselle," the act was soon taken on tour. Tragedy struck in 1879 when, on tour in Portsmouth, the condition of the safety net hadn't been checked, and upon landing, Giselle continued right through it. While avoiding serious injury, her confidence in Farini was otherwise broken. This, on top of pay disputes between the pair, saw Giselle attempt to, well, run away from home to join the circus. She pleaded her case to the infamous P.T. Barnum, wanting him to hire her instead. Barnum had been visiting England to witness the Human Cannonball Act. Barnum turned her down, but Farini and Giselle would eventually leave England and perform at the Barnum and Bailey Circus, where, reportedly, Giselle was paid $250 a day to perform for 6 days of the week, giving her an annual salary of $78,000 in 1880, or around 2.5 million USD today, well above what she had received solely under Farini. Rosa Richter, aka Giselle, would go on to marry George Starr, an agent of Barnum's, and in between performances, they would pursue their own goals of running an opera company. During this time, Rossa would make the occasional return to performing as Giselle, but this all came to a crashing end in 1891 at age 31. Performing in New Mexico, after having completed her Cannonball Act, she took to the high wire to perform a stunt she had been doing for years. 40 feet, or 12 meters, she fell when the poles holding the wire hadn't been fastened properly, landing on her hands and feet with a metal pole landing on her back. An audience member described it as the most horrible accident I ever witnessed. Rossa had broken her back, and with it, retired from circus life. Although she was the first human cannonball, she wasn't the last, and it is still an act that is performed to this day. An act still containing all the thrills and danger of the very first performance back from April 2nd, 1877. While The Rise and Fall of the Great Mondello, by Royal Crown Revue, is a song about a trapeze artist, the spirit of the song, the great Mondello will take to the sky, watch him go, see him fly, and the dangers presented in it, down and down, down and down, kersplatty, on the ground, are definite parallels to Giselle and her life as a human cannonball. Fortunately, despite the rotten net incident and later high wire fall, the story of Giselle didn't mirror that of Mondello. Nothing left, just a stain. Thursday, April 3rd. On this day, not year, Martin Cooper stepped outside to make an important phone call. Phones are an important part of our modern-day society, almost being a requirement to lead a modern life. From communication to information to destination, the mobile phone of today has come a long way from the creation of Alexander Graham Bell, if indeed he was solely responsible. While credit was given to Bell, his last-minute change, that mirrored a rival's patent, has always left some to wonder if Bell didn't have access to the submitted filings. However, that's for another day. Bell was the first to make a phone call on March 10th, 1876, ringing up his assistant with the now famous line, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." While the call never left the building, it was a defining moment in the history of technology. It wouldn't be the only defining first telephone call, however. Nearly 100 years later, in 1973, another phone call would be made that would go on to shape communication as we know it. Martin Cooper, with a degree in electrical engineering, started work at Motorola in 1954. Initially, he worked on developing new portable products, which culminated in the introduction of the world's first portable handheld police radio in 1967. In doing so, he realized something. In his own words, "When people could communicate while they're traveling and moving around, they're much more productive." Soon, Martin and Motorola had set their sights on something more than just a portable radio. True wireless communication. A mobile phone. At that time, the biggest competition, in America, that Motorola and Martin faced was from the much larger telecommunication monopoly of AT&T and their Bell Labs research group. The lab had started operation in 1925 with 3,600 engineers and staff, and over the years provided many technological firsts. The car phone was first developed in 1946, but was expensive to install, expensive to use, and had a limited range. The 60s would see AT&T introduce an improved car phone service, and helped introduce the idea of a private communication spectrum to the US government and the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. But this wasn't a truly mobile phone. While the car phone was a start, it still had the similar flaw of a wired house phone that Martin was looking to overcome. Although wireless, to use it you still had to be tethered to the car. Tethered, that is, until this day in 1973. Motorola had called for a press conference and had booked out a penthouse at the Hilton Hotel in New York to demonstrate what they were about to show. But before their conference was held and the news would be made public, Martin had to make a quick call. Standing on the street in front of the Hilton, Martin reaches into his pocket and pulls out his phone book. He had met Dr. Joel Engel, his counterpart at Bell Labs, before, and exchanged numbers. So, with people walking by, looking on curiously, Martin dialed the number into his Motorola Dynatac, a 2.5-pound, 10-inch tall, 1.5-inch wide, and 3-inch deep. That's 1.1 kilogram and 25 by 3.8 by 7.6 centimeter brick of a phone, and placed the call. Joel Engel answered, and Martin, just like Alexander Graham Bell nearly 100 years prior, made a telephone first. The first phone call over mobile phone. "Joel," Martin began, "I'm calling you from a real cellular phone. A portable, handheld telephone." He was reportedly met by defeated silence. This wasn't Martin Cooper's only first that day. During the demonstration to the press later, he accidentally dialed the wrong phone number, stating rather sheepishly, "Our new phone can't eliminate that." Looking back at his invention in a 2003 interview with the BBC, Martin stated, "Wireless is freedom. It's about being unleashed from the telephone cord and having the ability to be virtually anywhere when you want to be. That freedom is what cellular is all about. It pleases me no end to have had some small impact on people's lives, because these phones do make people's lives better. They promote productivity. They make people more comfortable. They make them feel safe and all these things. In the sense I had a small contribution there makes me feel very good." Today, Martin Cooper is 98 years old and still alive in 2025. And while he didn't foresee all the technology currently built into the modern mobile phone, he did predict that everybody would have one. And it looks like he was just about right. As per a 2023 article, there were more mobile phone subscriptions than people on the planet. 8.58 billion subscriptions compared to 7.95 billion people. There's only one song pairing I could think of for this story. It's the best, beats the rest, cellular modular interactive odular. That's right, it's Bananaphone by Raffi. Friday, April 4th. On this day, not year, actress Lana Turner was starring in a very different genre to her usual appearances. Slasher. Julia Jean Lana Turner was born in 1921, and by age 16 had been signed onto a contract by Warner Brothers and MGM soon after, making her movie debut as murder victim Mary Clay in the 1937 movie They Won't Forget. By the 1940s, she was a star, appearing as lead actress in movies and attracting the attention of many. In 1942, and then again in 1943, she married her second, of an eventual 7, husbands, and together they had a daughter in 1943, Cheryl Crane. While Lana and Steve Crane would eventually divorce, Lana continued acting. While filming for a movie in 1957, she began receiving calls and gifts from a man calling himself John Steele. Unbeknownst to Lana, John Steele was actually Johnny Stompanato, a former Marine and associate of gangster Mickey Cohen. He had divorced his first wife and moved to Hollywood, married an actress, and divorced her shortly after. He had a phone book full of actresses' numbers, and Lana's was in it. Johnny seemed to be infatuated with the stars of Hollywood, with Frank Sinatra once even warning Johnny to stay away from Ava Gardner. Soon, Johnny and Lana began dating. This wasn't a peaceful time for Lana, as Johnny was abusive, argumentative, and very jealous. While filming a movie in London, word got back to Johnny that Lana was getting very close with her male co-star on set, a young actor, with this movie being only his 7th role. Johnny hopped right on a plane and flew to London, spending 14 hours stewing in his anger. Bursting in on the set, he caught the actors filming a scene, the script having them together on a couch. This was too much for Johnny, and pulling a gun, he pointed it at the man advancing towards him. Unfortunately for Johnny, this man was Sean Connery, and he twisted the gun out of Johnny's hand before punching him, doubling him over. The police were called and Johnny was deported from the country, having broken the UK's gun control laws. The relationship between Lana Turner and Johnny Stompanato came to a definitive end during the evening of April 4th, 1958. The week prior, Lana, together with her now 14-year-old daughter Cheryl, had moved into a new, rented property, 730 North Bedford Drive, Beverly Hills, California. The night of the 4th, Johnny had arrived, and soon he and Lana were in a heated argument in Lana's bedroom. The argument was full of threats of violence from Johnny. "I'll get you if it takes a week or a year. I'll cut your face up. I'll stomp you. If I can't do it myself, I'll find someone who will. That's my business." With further threats against Cheryl and Lana's mother thrown in also. Finally, Lana asked Johnny to leave, breaking off their relationship. But Cheryl had been listening into the entire argument, and, fearing for her mother's safety, took action. A 2012 recollection by Cheryl Crane. There's a knife on the counter. I picked it up, ran back up the stairs. Her door suddenly flies open. I see Johnny coming towards me. He's got his hand up. I raise the knife, and he walks right into it. And he looked at me, and he said, "My God, Cheryl, what have you done?" This account differs slightly from the New York Times detailings of the events from April 6th, 1958, in which Cheryl recounts, "I went into the room. Then I pushed the knife into his stomach with all my might." In either case, the end result was the same. The knife, brand new, just purchased that week, had punctured through the liver, portal vein, and aorta. Johnny dropped to the floor, dead before anyone could see to him. Cheryl put the knife down on a marble table and phoned her father, while Lana called a doctor, who in turn notified the police. The following day, Cheryl Crane was arrested. Johnny, despite his notorious temper, attitude towards women, and mob associations, only had 2 arrests on his police record, one for vagrancy, and the second for suspicion of robbery. The case of the murder went to court, but Cheryl was eventually acquitted. The stabbing deemed a justifiable homicide, and no charges were laid. The song pairing for this story is Tijuana Bible by Tom Russel, a fictitious account of a treasure seeker digging up Johnny's body to find a secret treasure map. It opens with the line, "Lana Turner's daughter killed Johnny Stompanato." Saturday, 5th of April. On this day, not year, Canada put on a rock show for the ages. Can you smell the maple syrup or feel that chill in the air? That's right. Today finds us back in America's hat, Canada. We were last here in episode 8 to look back on the dawn of ice hockey and the fight that broke out after the first game. While Canadians have the reputation of being one of the nicest people on Earth, did you know that they also created one of the largest non-nuclear explosions ever recorded? What monstrous entity deserved this? What evil could exist that would force the normally so affable Canadians to resort to such drastic, explosive measures? Well, a rock. A really big rock. Let me explain. Ripple Rock, as it's called, was named by Captain George Henry Richards in 1862, after the oscillation effect the obstacle had on the water. Discovered by Europeans in 1791 by George Vancouver aboard the HMS Discovery. Ripple Rock is located between Vancouver Island, off the western coast of Canada, and British Columbia, Canada, on the mainland, in a narrow stretch of water separating the 2 landmasses. George Vancouver referred to this as one of the vilest stretches of water in the world. Far from just an ordinary rock, Ripple Rock was actually an underwater mountain, with the twin peaks of it just 9 and 21 feet, or 3 and 6 meters, below water at low tide. This played havoc with the currents, forming eddies and whirlpools up to 40 feet across, and any boat trying to get through was either at risk of hitting the submerged obstacles or being knocked around by the currents. They would have to add time onto their trip as they waited for the optimal time of slack tide to pass around Ripple Rock. In 1953, $200 million worth of shipping had to pass through, and as we learnt in episode 10 about the Suez Canal blockage, in the world of shipping, time is money, and any ship waiting on ideal conditions to pass around Ripple Rock was burning it. Over the years, many ships didn't wait, and the first two accidents were the United States warships, the Saranac and the Wachusett. They weren't alone in this, as in the 100 years prior to 1950, 20 large vessels and 100 smaller ones had fallen victim to Ripple Rock. It's thought the rock had claimed between 110 to 114 lives in these disasters. For many decades, the rock had been the centre of a debate within Canada. One faction, from the mainland, wanted the rock destroyed, while the other, from Vancouver Island, had plans of using the rock to stage a bridge and railroad as a connection to the mainland. When ideas were floated to destroy Ripple Rock, Vancouver would casually suggest they would withdraw from being a part of Canada if it happened. But eventually enough was enough, and attempts to destroy Ripple Rock were made. The first, in 1943, saw a barge attempt to hold steady by Ripple Rock, anchored by 6 thick cables, with the plan being to drill into the rock and dynamite it away. Unfortunately, the currents were too strong, and the anchors didn't last, snapping one after another. A second attempt came 2 years later, in 1945, and this time, rather than anchor the barge through cables in the water, 1,000-metre long or 3,500-foot long cables, weighing 11 tons, were stretched over the water, and the problem was approached from above. But this too ended in failure. Alphonse Fournier, Canadian Minister of Public Works, was defeated, and was quoted as saying, "My department has given up," and the floor was opened up to anyone else with any ideas. Northern Construction Company and Boyle's Drilling Company stepped up to the plate, or as this is Canada, took to the ice. Seeing as attempts to go through the rock had failed, and attempts to go over the rock had failed, they decided to go under instead. For 3 years, a rotating shift of miners worked to dig down and across the 762-metre distance into the base of Ripple Rock, where eventually 1,400 tons worth of Nitromex 2H TNT was placed. Then, on this day of April 5th, in 1958, the final attempt to deal with Ripple Rock was to be made. Residents were cleared away in a 3-mile or 5-kilometre exclusion zone from the blast. Locals prepared the best they could. Unsure how large the explosion would be, they opened windows, put plates and glasses on the ground, and took pictures off the wall, standing outside to avoid any possible shattering windows. 7,000 feet, or 2 kilometers away, hidden in a bunker, sat mission control and a camera crew, complete with a 25-inch telescopic lens, to broadcast the event live across Canada. Then, at 9:31 a.m., the explosion occurred. It's worth pausing here and looking the video of the event up on YouTube, as the scale is truly extraordinary. By the time the blast cleared and the 600,000 tons of rock had settled, Ripple Rock was no longer a danger to ships. Copping out with the song pairing for this story by picking a song from a local Vancouver punk band, the Evaporators, from their aptly named album, Ripple Rock, and the titular song, Ripple Rock. Sunday, April 6th. On this day, not year, officers the world over got a little more organised and a little more colourful. Spencer Ferguson Silver III was a chemist and a scientist, and he had just failed. Intending to create a super strong adhesive for use by his employer 3M, the glue, made from tiny acrylic spheres, was supposed to be strong enough for aircraft assembly. Instead, it could barely stick together two pieces of paper. Silver was later quoted as saying, "At the time, we wanted to develop bigger, stronger, tougher adhesives. This was none of those." Eventually, a colleague, Art Fry, got wind of Silver's failed glue and struck onto the idea that its weakness may be a strength, one that would help stop his bookmark falling out during choir. Fry had been using scrap paper prior to mark the songs in his book, but found they kept falling out and he was losing his place. The first few attempts using Silver's adhesive, or unglue, as it had been called, weren't successful, leaving behind too much residue on the book pages. However, 3M allowed employees time to work on personal projects, and Fry got stuck into his. Together with Silver, they made improvements to the adhesive, while the only paper they could access was scrap paper coloured canary yellow from a lab next door. Soon the pair began leaving messages around the office for each other. "I thought what we have here isn't just a bookmark. It's a whole new way to communicate," said Fry. However, 3M weren't so optimistic after initial sales tests. Under the name Press and Peel, sales failed to meet expectations. A second test run, however, offering free samples directly to officers in Boise, Idaho, resulted in 90% of those using the product stating they would buy it. Then, on this day in 1980, the Post-it note was released in stores across the United States, and the world didn't look back. As of 2013, 3M were manufacturing 50 billion Post-it notes a year. As for a song pairing, I couldn't go past one song in particular. A hit from Simple Minds, "Don't You Forget About Me," which I think sums up the Post-it note pretty well. And that's it for another week, from the 31st of March to the 6th of April. But we're not finished just yet. First, we need to see if you have been paying attention. Okay, pens and paper at the ready. Let's begin. Question 1 from Monday. What film won the first Golden Raspberry? Question 2 from Tuesday. What 3 things was the fake iceberg crafted from? Question 3 from Wednesday. I only mentioned the word and description once, but what is a funambulist? Question 4 from Thursday. What were the 2 firsts that Martin achieved in this story? Question 5 from Friday. Which Hollywood star disarmed Johnny in London? Question 6 from Saturday. How many attempts were made prior to 1958 to destroy Ripple Rock? And finally, question 7 from Sunday. What colour, specifically, is the standard Post-it note? Feel free to go back and listen to any of them again. As for now, let's move on to the answers. The answer to Monday, the first Golden Raspberry, was won by Can't Stop the Music. Tuesday, the fake iceberg was made from plastic sheets, firefighting foam, and shaving cream. Wednesday, a funambulist is a tightrope walker. Thursday, Martin's firsts were the first mobile phone call and the first misdial. Question 5 from Friday. The Hollywood star that disarmed Johnny in London was a pre-James Bond Sean Connery. The answer to question 6. 2 attempts were made prior to destroy Ripple Rock? And finally, what colour is the standard post-it note? The answer to question 7 from Sunday is canary yellow. Hopefully you got a few of those questions correct, or in the worst case, took away other facts from today's episode, just not the ones I happened to ask questions about. Now this actually brings us to the end of the episode this time. Hopefully you've enjoyed yourself and learnt a new fact or two along the way. If you're able, I would be grateful if you were to rate the podcast and share this episode with friends and family. But if that isn't your speed, I'll just be happy if you tuned in again next week, where we'll be looking back at some history from March 7th to the 13th. You can reach me on thisdaynotyear@gmail.com, and be sure to let me know if I've made any heinous mistakes in my research. But until then, I've been Adam, you've been listening to This Day Not Year, and I hope you have an historic week.